Hello and welcome back to the Periphery. Hey guys, hey folks.
How's it going?
Great. How are you guys?
Doing pretty well.
Despite
the weather.
Yeah, it's pretty bad weather here in sunshiny Palo Alto. And today we're in fact sitting in a restaurant, which is pretty nice, pretty good, because today we have a good friend.
My name is Duncan Harrison. I'm the sommelier and beverage director at Zola and Bar Zola in Palo Alto, California. We're also in the midst of opening up a new restaurant here on Ramona Street, where the old Pro used to be, which is where we're recording live in studio.
This is super cool. This is definitely the coolest location
Yeah,
Periphery
yeah.
has ever recorded.
Yeah, you've had the most weird locations. You've had hallway and
Oh
stairway,
yeah, I'm scrappy.
but
like
never
that.
abandoned or barn construction.
Yeah. It's setting the mood for this conversation, I think.
It totally is. And so today, Duncan and I, we have a lot of great conversations. And one day we're talking about tipping and just, how he runs his restaurants and what works, what doesn't. And I don't know, like a year ago, I was looking online, or not looking online, but my algorithm was feeding me a ton of tipping is problematic. The history of tipping is like racist, it's classist, and yada, 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 yada. And it raises two fundamental questions to me. One, should tipping exist? And two, if it is to exist, how should it exist? And I think that like, a higher level question of that is just, how do we make the most equitable and just society, or companies and X, Y, and Z? And so today we have Duncan, who's got some ideas.
I do have some ideas, but we were just talking before we started recording. Have any of you three worked in restaurants before?
I have.
Jess has, Marcus.
I was perhaps the worst waitress on the face of the planet.
Sure.
And just to throw it out there, I don't know about tipping because I felt like my performance was being judged. Sometimes it just wasn't a good job for me. It just wasn't a good personality fit. And so my tips
Why?
were subpar. I like services that's very hands-off and not like, hi, how's your, try to change your mood. So I was just kind of like, do you need something to drink? It just wasn't a skill set for me. Like, people have different skills. That's not my skill.
God, and it just does has this psychological effect, because sometimes you come in, you're not vibing that day, and you're just like, oh, I don't want to put on this smile for you, but you have to force it.
Yeah.
And by the time you've done 8 hours of that or 10 hours, you're just emotionally just exhausted.
Yeah.
And you're like, I can't talk to anyone for weeks now.
People that are good at that, it's so incredible though how they can just completely change your day.
Totally. Yeah.
True.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess that's part of the whole tipping in the restaurant game right now is you hire personalities and you try to get people out there that are gonna be a good representative of your bar and restaurant, and hopefully make some regulars out of it.
So is tipping a conversation had between employees at a restaurant? I remember the first time I was overseas, and there's that whole thing where you don't tip.
Yeah.
And so I'm
It's so
wow,
uncomfortable
this
as
is
an
so nice.
American.
Why do we even need to tip? This was
Yeah.
before I had worked as a waitress, but I just wonder. I'm sure they probably have workers' rights. I assume. I haven't looked into that. So what do you got? What is the conversation like?
Yeah, I actually don't know too much about laws or culture, tipping culture in European countries or abroad. But yeah, I mean, the tips are the biggest part of the conversation. The majority of my job is staffing and making sure everyone's making enough money to get by. So really, within the United States, there's two major differences from state to state. Whether they have, I forget the name of it exactly. Maybe you guys know, but there's a tipped minimum wage that's way below, it's $2.13 per hour.
I've heard of that.
And then there's really,
I think they had that in Indiana, which is where I was working.
yeah, I mean, I think there's only 7 or 9 states, something in that amount, that actually have full minimum wage and then tips on top of that. So, it can be really, really complicated, balancing this stuff. And so, most restaurants' profit margins are really tight. So a lot of times people will say, oh, just pay your people more and then raise the prices on the menu. But when you're working in a climate where other people aren't doing that, those menu prices seem artificially high. And all the examples of places I know of, from the East Bay to SF, that have tried that, have floundered instantly. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good time to segue into should tipping exist, and despite its rocky history. And I think it should. And I think when it comes to equity, Afi's second question here, it's really one of the only industries that has a built-in like pay scaling based on inflation. So as prices rise, the wages of your employees rise directly with that, right? Because if now people are spending what they used to spend $80 per meal, now it's $100, because it's a percentage-based thing, those kind of like working class people don't get left behind by the like raise in prices. So
assuming people don't start tipping less.
Correct.
Well, that's a bit ironic because I feel like in corporate jobs, the inflation does not track with, or the salaries do not track with inflation.
That's right.
And also, I mean, I just kind of think you're saying how it's a big part of the conversation. What does what is that actual conversation? What do employees want, and how has that conversation been different at the different places and the different stages of your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, only until the past 10 years, it used to be very individualistic, right? So when Jess was working in Indiana, she wasn't making a ton of tips. Maybe she had a couple of rough days here and there. Because she was coming up, what do you guys want to drink? Here's your lemonade.
They weren't my tears.
So
I would have loved to be one of your patrons.
I know, I kind of want to see this. We could act it out in here or something.
But I've been really good at that one restaurant. I think it's where all the servers
It's Dick's Resort.
Yeah,
they're not nice to you.
Yeah, you might have thrived in that place.
Dick's Resort. It's a perfect name. So back in the day, it used to be highly individualistic, where servers would, they track their own sales individually, and their own tips, they just got to put it directly into their pocket. Since then, I think there's been some changes in the labor laws from state to state, which allowed for tip pooling, which means everyone contributes to this pool of cash in the middle, and it gets redistributed to everyone to make sure that people that are having maybe struggling one week or really killing it the next week, it raises the ground floor for how much they can make and caps the ceiling a little bit, offering them a little bit more stability in this industry that's super tip dependent. So everyone makes tons of money in December and then makes almost nothing January and February from the seasonality of things. So
what caused that change? What was the advocacy like, and why?
I think that there's a lot of factors that I don't have a great grip on. I more came into the industry as it was sort of transitioning, and I think it was purely need-based. It was a necessity thing, because with all these servers that are career types, working with others that are just kind of passing through, maybe they're going to school, you'd have these guys at school that weren't making anything, and then a couple guys taking over the whole restaurant and all the resentment that built up. And I think after some business owners saw this go through the reps and seeing the turnover remain super high, they decided, like we did, that it's time to make a change and rethink how we can make this industry a little bit more equitable, like you said, right? So, I think there's some psychology to tipping too, and we want to make sure everyone that is spending their hard-earned or their life's time here is making a reasonable amount.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be better for morale to kind of work together as a team towards the income.
Right. I think when Afi and I first sat down and started talking about this, the analogy kind of kept popping up as it's a bit of a communal system, or a bit socialistic in a way, to contribute to this resource pool and then make sure everyone kind of is getting what they need. And it raises some interesting questions about the dynamics of political systems, and are we going to be more socialistic in the future, or are we going to be more independent driven and conservative in the future? And there's kind of pluses and minuses to both sides. And I think the tipping system can be kind of analogous to that.
And just the way that people value service workers, even just varies crazily across states. I think there's a pretty solid correlation between minimum wage being higher and there being it's standard for it to be a 20%, 25% tip. Mm-hmm. Whereas where minimum wage is lowered, the standard is 15. If you will look up these maps online.
Oh, really?
So I think people just
Indiana,
they value
15?
the service.
Is it?
I think it I don't know. I probably was trying to be like, they just aren't tipping me because people just don't tip here. No, it was one of those things where like I've just been curious and I've looked up like how much is a good tip? Like what is a good tip? Because it used to be, people have told me it's 20%. Other people say it's 18%, but it just varies widely by state, which is very interesting.
I think there's like a bit of a change that's happening with the use of devices at these restaurants too.
Oh, yeah, tell me about it, because now I'm tipping like 35%.
Oh my God. Yeah, those first three options, it's like 30%,
I'm like,
32%.
That's what I'm doing it, but I'm like, I don't want to tip 35.
They do the math for you, so you're like, all right.
Yeah.
And you also feel more pressure when like more people are around.
And I'm
You're
like,
I don't want to, be that guy. Like I got to find the middle ground or tip the highest.
Yeah, I'm like holding this device, like looking you in your eyes.
Yeah, it's very
Like I got hunger in these eyes, I'm like, please, please. I'm so hungry.
Listen, fucker, you're paying $10 for this coffee. Give me a tip.
Okay, coffee specifically, I read something online. Don't quote me here, but quote the internet. That coffee shops like have some unique, like not like corporate, not like Starbucks, but like mom and pop, quote unquote, coffee shops have like some unique pay structure where it's like basically this article told me there was no need to tip at a coffee shop because it's built into the business model. I tip at my
no, I tipped too.
local
It was
coffee
like
shop.
Washington Post.
I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was, but it was like it doesn't. I don't know. I think it was like it doesn't go to the employees as much as it goes to like overhead.
That's something that is kind of interesting as well. So if you guys have ever been out to dinner, I think a lot of people don't know this, and you're going with a party of like 6 or more. A lot of times it's really common to see included gratuity, right? Like 20% service fee or whatever that is. So anytime a restaurant includes a service fee like that, the ownership is entitled to, I believe it's 100% of that money. They can choose to give that to the servers as like a courtesy. But basically with the way that the labor laws work is if there's an included fee for doing business, that is not technically a tip. And there's no it's not necessary for the ownership to give the server that amount. So
Well, yeah, okay, so like, I wanted to like nail in on, you said like the labor law shifted, but there's still differences in how tips are distributed, at least in practice.
yeah.
So like what is the floor, at least in California, like what is the floor and how much latitude do business owners have to just call the service fee and not give anyone a tip, or call it a tip and,
Yeah, I you guys are probably more aware of the laws than I am. I kind of bump into them from time to time,
Like,
and
what
they
can
kind
you
of add
do?
as bumpers.
Like,
But so the one law that changed relatively recently is
Don't
that
know the law by the way.
when we talk about like the back of house versus the front of house, the back of house is like everything behind the scenes, like the kitchen and the dishwashers, and then the front of house would be the servers and everyone in the chain of service that happens between the kitchen and when you get your food and stuff. So one law that changed in recent, like since we've been alive anyway, is that like the back of house is able to receive part of the tip sharing thing. So that completely changed the whole way this works. And now I think generally restaurants are required to prove that the tip pooling and redistribution is a fair system. So if you were to bring it in front of a judge, if it was so obvious that it's like this is completely unfair, you have some violations, but it's really within a certain amount as long as you're being fair and equitable and it's established what the system is amongst all the staff. You have some room to like fine tune it and make sure everyone's getting theirs, taking home enough money at the end of every night. So like to answer your question, Afi, like a lot of times this works out where some places, especially here in San Francisco or in Palo Alto, California, all the tips get pooled and then they get redistributed based on hours spent at the restaurant. And sometimes that can be equal amongst the front of house and the back of house. That's there to kind of supplement the income that really there's a big gap between what the back of house guys make. Usually in this area, it's $25, $30 an hour. And then in the front of house, after tips, it's minimum wage. A lot of them are clearing like $50 or $60 an hour. And so I think a lot of people, we're always towing that line of like keeping people from getting resentful about each other. Yeah. They look at their own work and they say like in the back of the house, they're burning their hands. They're screaming. They're working so hard. They're working with sharp knives, and it's an intense situation. And then you go out to the front of house and you'll
You
catch
have
me.
to deal with people.
Oh yeah. The dreaded human beings. But you'll catch me like leaning on the bar at some point, like tasting the new wines that just are about to go on the menu, and it's not obvious that I'm like pulling my weight. I can't participate in the tip pool because I'm a manager. That's one important thing. So if you're able to hire or fire people and you write the schedule, you cannot participate in the tip pool. So I stay out of that, but I think that also makes me a good person to kind of help fine tune the system that we operate under. So. I work directly with everyone from the front to back of house and make sure everyone's feeling like it's fair and equitable and stuff. And so I think the whole redistribution method can be a really great system, but it has to be in the hands of someone that's trustworthy and is willing to do the administrative work necessary to keep it fair and operating well.
So you brought up sort of the new tipping technologies or just like payment technologies. Like we all see those like little toast things or the little iPhone extension swipes. Have you noticed trends like very clear, like people pay more, people pay less, or is it kind of all over the board?
Yeah, people react differently. It's kind of been almost a bit controversial. Like most people see that and it suggests 20% at our restaurant, and it also says 18% and 22%, and there's like a sad face on the 18% and like a happy face on the 20, and then something super exciting on 22 or whatever. But I think it comes off as a bit pretentious, or like we expect something that is inherently like awkward to be expecting. So I notice people sometimes they kind of like, raise their look down their nose at it a little bit and kind of like frown and just like try to sneakily hit the 18% because it just feels
it's
so
like the
weird.
etiquette of it, because when you give a tip, I think some people are like, I'm such a good person, I'm gonna leave a nice tip. But if it's like the machine like assumed that you might, it's just like, well,
right.
It's like,
it
I
takes
will.
something from you.
But honestly, because every restaurant does it now, I feel like that's shifted the culture too. Like I feel like last summer when I was like first seeing, I was like, oh yeah, now the letter shop has a tip button.
Yeah,
It's
right.
not one I will say no to. But it's like I'm gonna find a fucking card. But I do think because everyone's doing it is like totally different now. Like I feel expected to do it, but I also don't feel like resentful over doing it anymore because maybe it's shifted how I value service workers. I don't know.
I could anticipate certain service workers, and I won't say like that people at your workplace do this, Duncan, but it would help pose problems to some, I won't say tax evasion, but some tax optimization strategies, like not reporting your cash tips to
Yeah, I think about that too. Yeah.
the federal government.
I mean, that's like a tale as old as time. Most of these guys back in the day, especially when it was so individualistic, they'd be pocketing all this cash tips, and then it was up to them at the end of the night to like tell us what you made.
Yeah.
And they'd put in like 25% of what they made. So it's super sketchy, and actually the way we're doing it these days is every single dollar is tracked, and then it's great because we redistribute it, and then the tip out like spreadsheets we use are like all open and available to everyone that works from the front to the back of house. Everyone gets to see it, and it's very transparent. So I think transparency in these systems is like super, super important. But yeah, I mean, like the tax evasion thing, it's especially as we get like more and more into this like credit card payment world, it's becoming less and less possible to cut those little corners. Yeah. And it's honestly, it's for the best. Like most restaurant owners, like all like are fearing some big audit someday, but everything's on credit card. It's all like very like monitored, and you can show it easily to someone who might be looking at it. So
there's some restaurants that are still cash only. And I'm like, if I were a prosecutor.
No, not a prosecutor. You have to do the IRS.
Yeah, I guess if I was law enforcement. But I did want to kind of circle back on, so you said you kind of need someone you trust a lot, or someone who's trustworthy in these positions. And I'm just very curious about the power dynamic that's just kind of inherent in the system. There's a power dynamic of, clientele and the workers, and there's a power dynamic between management and the workers. And so how do you manage that? You kind of touched on that, but also just that power dynamic is uncomfortable. It sounds like and is it possible to walk away or omit that power dynamic at all, or is that just kind of inherent to the industry in some respects?
I think it is inherent, and like many industries, it's all about like incentives, and so we incentivize people to do a good job with us by putting them in positions where they can make the most money, getting the best days, getting the longest hours that they can get on the tip pool and maximize their income for the time spent there. But there's no way around the power dynamic. I mean, honestly, it's really like I work for the people that work for us. It's so much less that they work for me. I try to go out and support them all I can. And having a leader that is like it understands like the difficulties of work every single day for these people and is willing to cover shifts and support. They'll end up trusting you so much more when it comes to like the most important thing, which is their money. And so I try to really be present and like try to leave the power thing on the side. But ultimately, if people are underperforming, it is my job to put the people that are performing in the position to do us the best. So there's no way around it, honestly.
Yeah.
So many people had problems in COVID, obviously. I think we are sitting in like the ruins of probably a COVID, right, a COVID casualty.
You're right.
How was that? How was that for you? Like,
it's scary. Yeah. I mean, I was working at a formerly top 50 bar in San Francisco called Trick Dog when the pandemic kicked off. And there was something about being there at that time that we felt so kind of invincible to it. I mean, like, we were a world-renowned bar with, like world's best cocktail menu awards and James Beard nominations and stuff. And, overnight it was like
Duncan touch.
Oh, come on! I wish I could say I was doing more than I was there, but I mean that was a huge like splash of like ice cold water in the face. Like everything felt like it was never going to end, and the money was endless, and there was going to be people constantly looking for cocktails and good food and good entertainment. But yeah, I mean it was honestly terrifying and unsettling. I mean, I'm sure you guys were affected in the same way. Like so much of what you enjoyed going out and being able to do was just gone overnight. But it took me literally years to regroup and recover so much of the stuff I'd worked for to get back to kind of where I'm at now.
And so like this a bit deviating from tipping in general, but just restaurant business model, just the profit margins even at one of the most successful restaurants in a city that is one of the most resourced, struggled and rocked. Is the restaurant industry kind of due for new models? Like, it seems like restaurants are kind of doing that in some respect. Like DoorDash has those pop-up shops that they can make money on.
Right, like ghost kitchens or whatever. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's way overdue for a rethinking of the business model. And, I know we're kind of moving away from tips a little bit, but I think it's an important topic, excuse me.
It's tech, it's system. So.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And like, I think one thing the pandemic did was it accelerated trends in a lot of ways. And as like the restaurant industry was like slowly coming to grips with like, oh God, we have to like figure out a new way to get income in the door. We got hit with COVID, and it set us forward probably like 5 years or more. So a lot of people had to think, like, how do we redesign what we do? Now we're pushing people outdoors to dine outdoors, more kind of European, like al fresco style, which I think is a really good trend. Awesome. And then, also this like sort of strong arming people for tip money and all these excessive fees for dining out. I feel like maybe it's kind of a bad trend. Like, I think maybe there's a point of people's generosity could run out, or they could feel a bit abused by that. So whenever we can avoid adding any fees or, like tacking on anything that's not 100% necessary, we do, just purely out of respect for the people that come in and do this. When you were talking about the technology of like, here, sign on my little Toast handheld device, and it pops up and it's like 25%, please. A lot of times I just get a feeling when I connect with a table and I print the receipt and I drop it off with a pen, and we always do better than 20%. So I think it can be an artificial like cap to how much you can make based on the like inhuman nature of this little device, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just like when you're, arguing with someone. If you're arguing with someone face to face, it's like more civil and more empathetic. But if you're online, you're like typing up nasty shit.
I would bet that even if that Toast thing were like, here, use your finger to write it, it would maybe even be better than punching it in yourself, because there's just like a personal fillet. I do think people like to feel good about themselves when they're tipping.
Yeah, probably
even
right.
though it's expected.
I mean, I feel very good, and I'm like custom, and I go above what they want. I'm about to fuck it up over
Taking that
here.
extra step.
And, there's another, I think when it comes to tipping, there is one kind of problematic aspect, is that the people that can afford to do it more are going to get preferential treatment just from the service staff, And so if someone comes in and they have a great time and they're here to have a modest time out and they can't necessarily flex and throw $100 bills around, they still deserve the same respect and treatment as someone who comes in and is just like money bagging, making it rain for our servers and stuff. Which happens.
I kind of think that raises an interesting question about, luxury items versus not. Like, I mean, I don't think people are kind of entitled or, must go to restaurants, So I think, I don't know.
But there's different levels of restaurants,
obviously I'm going to agree that, like, everyone's entitled to the same level of respect. That's all I'm saying. But it is a bit of an interesting question, just like, that seems another unavoidable element of consuming a luxury type of experience.
I suppose so. But the two people sitting in this table and that table are both paying for the product that they were asked to pay for. But one person is getting better treatment and friendlier and warmer treatment than the other, who technically both of them were able to pay for this service that was asked to them. So, and then like, that could totally open up into all these like stereotypes about who comes in and tips what, which is totally gross. So, I mean, to me,
God, I'm gonna get canceled for saying this.
Oh no, no, don't say it. Don't say it.
No. From what I just said, I was like, I hope it doesn't get misconstrued, but whatever.
Oh man, yeah. I really dream of a day where tipping could be gone. I think it's totally unfair that some people might be getting prejudged to be thought that, oh, this person doesn't look like they're gonna tip. Maybe they come in with like their streetwear and they're like they were just smoking out front or whatever, and you're just like, oh man, like this guy's gonna come and have like 4 beers and leave us like 50 cents on the bar top. But it's just these like biases that we have to get past, and like every part of society.
You're so right, because when I wear like Stanford gear, when I walk to a restaurant, it's a totally different experience than when I'm wearing like, I don't know, my rugged wear, and this is like same place. I'm just like, noted.
Yeah. So I guess we have to ask ourselves, like, is that really fair to be able to like judge people and subconsciously adjust the product we're giving them based on their appearance? I mean, it's something that like a lot of servers just have ingrained in them, and it's totally wrong, and it's been created, that bias has kind of been created around this tipping environment. So that's one of the like casualties of having this tipping system, is that I think it kind of like put everyone's biases on like steroids in these like working class industries sometimes. So that's one of those things that like tipping needs to have. We have to figure out how we can address that. And maybe I could pass it off to you guys. Like, how can we live with tipping, which protects the like blue collar type workers of the world with protection from inflation and freedom of opportunity, and limit those like negative aspects of it.
I'm so glad you asked, because I was just going to like say, we always look at these like symptomatic problems that are actually speaking about a different problem. Like, so much of what you're identifying through tipping is not a tipping problem inherently. It's a racism problem, or a sexism problem, or a classism problem. And those, like, it's like our society has to become more perfect first before we have a more perfect system.
Agreed.
I think.
I personally think do away with tipping, increase minimum wage. I just feel like tipping was born out of, problematic history, which maybe we'll get into more. But like, I think there's a basic idea behind it, which is that two like servers, for example, might receive different tips, and it's based kind of on their personalities, like their performance and their personalities. And I think it's because we used to think of most jobs as like not really personality driven, like factory jobs or whatever. But now I feel like there are a lot of, like, as the idea of work is changing, people's personalities come out in their jobs all the time. They like literally are brands in and of themselves. So it's less as of like an individualistic task that you're doing and these interactions that you're having. I think it would take stress away from just like the day-to-day, like every interaction that you have at a restaurant, for example, you should want to do your best because you want them to come back. It's not because like to get that tip that one time. It's because you're like speaking out for the product in the hopes that people will like continue to return, and I think is incentive enough to be a good server.
For sure. Yeah.
Honestly, you have the experience. So
No, I wouldn't call it that. My brother-in-law owns a restaurant. It is surely the only reason I had a job.
Shout out to your brother-in-law's restaurant, right?
Yeah,
Indiana?
that's my brother-in-law. Yes, Greek's Pizzeria.
Yeah, go check them out.
It's really good. They are all better than me. They all did better than me. It's a pleasant place to spend your day.
Servers will be super friendly there, we promise.
Jess has been fired.
Well, I think you're totally like on point with all of that. I think the important thing is that all those things are true, that the incentive should be to get people coming back and make sure they have a great experience with the product, as long as they're able to make enough money. And it just seems that raise the minimum wage, raise prices. Really, if we took if we redid our business model now, there was a $50 entree on the menu, I could only imagine, just right off the top of my head, some of those things would climb into like the $70 territory to make up for how much people our servers would make. I mean, it creates this like high ceiling with the tipping industry where these guys can leave with like $50 an hour, but most small businesses in a downtown that are like family run could never dream of paying. They're maybe hoping to make $30, $40 an hour themselves for owning it. So it's this weird dynamic. Like how do we keep the people that need this job, that is a skilled job, making enough to survive and do it for a long time, so that we have a talented labor force, without like raising prices sky high so that no one can have access, or only the rich can have access to it.
Yeah.
Well, on the topic of recruiting talent, I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking about the fairness standard as applied to restaurants and bars. And it sounds like there's a lot of latitude for managers to kind of set the tipping culture within these places. And it seems to me that, like the places that are known to have like better tipping cultures and, like just better management would probably attract, the better talent. And so I'm curious how you see that playing out. Do you see you and your competitors as having like these clashing reputations for tipping, and does that manifest in like the hiring process when you're hiring employees?
Yeah, it absolutely does. So I think one of the huge draws for people to come work for us is that they can make a lot of money consistently. They're never gonna like break through the ceiling, a certain ceiling of like, $500 a night, where, many servers in that like individual, like to your topic of like competitors, maybe they'll say like, you take home everything you make, and half of the people there make $700-800 a night, and then the other half are making like 100 or 200. I think for recruitment alone, like our tip out policy is super advantageous to not only the people on the front of house that are making your cocktails or serving your table, but it also like trickles down to the support staff. We believe that none of that stuff would be possible at all if it weren't for the people running the glassware, doing the dishes, running the food, polishing the silverware. So we've created a pretty high ground floor for those people as well, and sacrificed a little bit of the ceiling from the people that are out there table side. I think most people come in, take one look at it, and they're like, this is pretty fair, and because it's all above board, there's so much transparency in it. I'm on board. Let's do it. Let's create this team culture. But I know a lot of places similarly that attract people they attract kind of the superstar mentalities that are a little bit individualistic and maybe not inherent good team players to chase after that big paycheck every single night. So more recruiting, we're trying to put this out in a way that will attract people that are interested in being good team players and making enough and working in an environment where no one's like struggling.
Yeah, so what are the main channels like for communicating this kind of information to people who don't yet work for you besides word of mouth? Are there like job boards or websites where people talk about the employee cultures at different places, or how does that work?
I mean, luckily for us, it's all been word of mouth.
Yeah.
We hire a handful of people, and they all have such a good time. At least the vast majority of them have such a good time. They just tell everyone they know, like, hey, I can get you a job. They're just looking for good, like, nice people that are trustworthy and have good personalities. So we're 100% word of mouth on that. I don't know how much luck people are having on job boards and through Craigslist or whatever right now. it must be really hard for those people. And
I mean, I'm like a big Bar Zola booster everywhere I go. Like, have you been to Bar Zola?
Yeah, when my parents came to visit, it was like first place first I took them to Rose and Crown, but then we went to Bar Zola.
Yeah.
oh, I love it.
You gotta butter them up first before they
For
get
sure.
to the main squeeze.
If you would want to share like the project that you're working on now, little announcement.
Yeah.
For the locals.
For the
listening
locals
in.
out here.
I appreciate you guys giving me some space to talk about it. While we talk about it in this space, but we sadly at Palo Alto, California, has lost an institution bar and restaurant called the Old Pro on Ramona Street. And you guys that have been going to Stanford for quite some time, I'm sure have spent some nights out hanging out here, maybe getting like hucked off of a mechanical bull.
Right in the bull, baby.
I almost
right in
got to the
bull.
minute mark where you're supposed to get like a free beer or something if you make it, but I only made it 57 seconds, so I live with that.
Yeah. Lose a lot of sleep over that one. But we removed the mechanical bull and got the lease to this place. So, if you guys are, let's see, we're recording this in February of 2023. And if you guys are all around this time next year, anyone listening to this or anyone sitting at the table with me now,
Oh, I'll be here.
please come and party with us because this place is going to be well funded, equitable, and just an amazing place to work and thus hang out and drink. So we don't have a name just yet, but it is all official. And yeah, we'd love to have you here. Could you come check us out in the Old Pro space sometime in next year?
Epic.
Awesome. Well,
Can't
thank
wait.
you so much,
Yeah.
Duncan. I really appreciate you giving our audience this epic conversation. Another epic one. It's crazy how we have a 100% hit rate.
Yeah. Also, speaking of tipping, if you want to follow us on Patreon.
It's like, give us money. We're poor.
Yeah, we need this.
All right. Thanks for joining the conversation. Like, subscribe, leave us a comment, send us an email. We love to hear from you. And as always, we will talk to you next week.